Maryland's Governor Larry Hogan, the head of the National Governors Association, today slamming the president for the lack of national testing, writing in the Washington Post, "Governors always do the hard work, make the tough decisions, and take the political heat. But an undertaking as large as a national testing program required Washington's help. We expected something more than constant heckling from the man who was supposed to be our leader." Wow. Joining me now is the governor of Maryland, Larry Hogan, a Republican governor. He's also the author of the soon-to-be-released book, Still Standing, Surviving Cancer, Riots, a Global Pandemic, and the Toxic Politics That Divide America. Governor, thank you very much for joining us today. It's good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
First of all, tell me, you have been a leader in terms of Washington and Maryland and this region. But as you've watched this as a leader of the National Governors Association, you are now taking on the President of the United States and blaming him for ignoring the severity of the crisis. You say that the White House failed to issue warnings, failed to draw up ventilators, life-saving equipment, eventually that every governor went his own way. And you write, instead of listening to his own public health experts, the president was talking and tweeting like a man more concerned about boosting the stock market or his reelection plans. Tell me what led you to this very strong denunciation of the White House response.
Well, just the article that appeared in the Washington Post today was really an excerpt from the book. So it wasn't a current account. It was really a recollection from the first several months of this pandemic, going back to my accounts from February, March, and April, maybe early May, during this pandemic. And I was just trying to be as honest and direct as possible. I've tried my best not to simply be one of the many people who've just been out there criticizing the president. I've tried to work in a constructive way, and I think they've made some improvements since then, quite frankly. But early on in the crisis, there's no question that there were serious mistakes that were made and that we could have done things better. And I speak very frankly about that in my book.
But with all due respect, this is still the case. The big story on the front page of the Washington Post today is that there is no plan. There's no plan for national testing. The president just in the last 24 hours talked to Dr. Fauci for the first time in 2 months. The CDC has been eliminated from gathering daily hospital data, and it's now been transferred to the Department of Health and Human Services, to the criticism of most public health experts. What has improved?
Well, I think those are some of the biggest mistakes that the president made throughout this pandemic, and that was not following the advice of the experts, the doctors, the scientists, his own CDC, and people like Dr. Fauci, who, in my opinion, has been the most respected, most trusted voice, and the guy that we're getting the most honest information from throughout this entire crisis. And quite frankly, this recent attack, this campaign against Dr. Fauci, in my opinion, is probably, although it was not covered in my book because it's happened so recently, I think it's probably one of the biggest mistakes that they've made, because throughout this, I think many Americans, myself included, have been listening very carefully to the advice and the input and the wisdom of Dr. Fauci, and to exclude him and some of the advice from the president's own team, I think, is a mistake. And I talk about this in the book. I mean, there were really smart people in the administration, in the CDC and HHS, and folks like Dr. Fauci who really were on top of this and who were giving great advice. And I talk about how the vice president was actually doing a good job of leading the coronavirus task force. But I think, sometimes the president was ignoring the advice of his own people, and he was going in a completely opposite direction, saying an exact opposite message of what the entire rest of the administration was saying.
Now, Dr. Fauci still has not appeared at a task force meeting on something as important as reopening schools, which you as a governor know is critical to all of the people, all of your constituents, and all of the governors are worried about this around the country. But even when the education healthcare task force meeting was held at the Department of Education, Dr. Fauci was sitting in the White House, not permitted to appear on camera or answer questions. That only happened last week.
I'm not sure the background there. I can't verify whether he was or wasn't allowed to appear on camera, but I think not having him there to talk about these important issues was probably a mistake. I'll say this. We had, as chairman of the National Governors Association, we had that very week on a Monday a really productive discussion where Dr. Robert Redfield laid out his CDC guidelines and recommendations to the states, which we found some really helpful information from the public health experts at the federal government. Who, many of the governors were happy with that, and it gave us some good advice to utilize in our states. And then I think the next day, the president came out and attacked his own the CDC director and his own coronavirus task force, what their recommendations were, and then tried to change the recommendations. Again, it's one of the things I'm talking about: the mixed messaging, the pinball of we get the good advice from the experts, and then we hear something different from the president. That was the most recent case of it. We had a great meeting, all the governors, with the vice president, with Robert Redfield. They came up with a really good report from the CDC, and the president stepped all over the message and started threatening people.
And his education secretary went on television and refused to say what the plan would be to reopen schools. The president is still downplaying the pandemic, recently saying again that it would disappear. It's not part of his campaign messaging. Can he afford to ignore the pandemic, given his reelection difficulties and the latest polls, which we're going to be talking about with Chuck Todd in a moment?
No, you certainly can't. I mean, we have these twin crises of the health crisis, of the global pandemic, which is not going away, is by no means behind us. In fact, we're seeing a huge spike in outbreaks in states across the country, and we've got the economic collapse that we've got to deal with as well. And obviously, these are going to be issues that are going to be critical to the campaign, but forget about the campaign. These are issues that are critical to the country, and we just need the president to lead and focus on these issues and maybe not worry so much about his Twitter account.
Given the mistakes that he has made, as cataloged in your book and in this excerpt from the book that is in the Washington Post today, does he deserve re-election?
What's that?
Does the president deserve to be re-elected? Does he deserve to be re-elected given all of the mistakes he's made on the biggest crisis facing our country, the pandemic?
Well, I think that's what the American people and are going to have a chance to decide between now and November. We've got a little over 100 days. This is going to be one of the most contentious, I would imagine, and most important elections we've had in our lifetime. And I think it's going to be a very tough battle. We're going to have to wait and see between now and then exactly what happens.
Would you campaign for him?
You know, I didn't campaign the first time. Right now, I'm the chair of the National Governors Association. I'm not getting actively involved in the politics and the campaign. I represent both Democratic and Republican governors, and we're a long way from that. I didn't vote for the president in the last race, and I'll have to decide what I'm going to do in this race in November. Like a lot of people in America, we'll have to just wait and see.
Would you consider running for president yourself next time around?
I think it's far too early to talk about that. I mean, let's get beyond the race in November. I have an important day job until January of 2023, and we're in the middle of a couple of really important crises, so I don't want to talk about 2024. But I think after November, regardless of what happens, we're going to be re-examining our divisive politics today, and both parties are going to figure out where they're going to head over the next 4 years.
Well, Governor, thank you very much. Congratulations on the book. We look forward to reading the whole book. I think it's coming out on July 28th. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.